What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining us on a Tuesday. We're here on a Tuesday. Yeah, that's right. We got another stream of Mission Briefing. I have with me Jake Dawkins. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, today we're gonna be previewing the new Rover CLI. So I'm not gonna get into it because honestly, I'm not well enough equipped to be telling you all about it. But guess what? Jake here is. So Jake, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit further for the folks on stream and let them know what we're going to talk about today and take a look at.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jake. I'm happy to be here. I am a part of the Apollo team. I've been with Apollo for a couple years at this point, and the bulk of that time has been working on the Apollo CLI, the Apollo VS Code integration that we currently have, and now Rover, which is the newest CLI tool that we have from Apollo. And I mean, in short, the mission of Rover is just to make working with graphs and managing graphs a lot more pleasant.
Yeah,
so that's what we're here today to show.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So, and when we talk about working with graphs, so what we're talking about specifically is working with graphs inside of Apollo Studio. And so Apollo Studio is a platform that has really cool functionality to do that, help you manage your graph. And what does that mean? Well, we'll take a look in a second, but you could do a lot of different things like compare schemas like from PRs against an existing schema, make sure you're not breaking things for any downstream clients. You get a nice change log of your graph, and you can see the changes that are happening to this graph over time. It's a really cool feature, and it gets into more when we start talking about federation and graph composition. So that's really what we're talking about specifically here today. So I hope you tune in for this and stick with us, because we're going to learn some really cool stuff. And another fun fact is that the Rover CLI is built with a framework language that a lot of folks are really loving these days, Rust. So I'm just throwing that out there because I am a big fan of Rust. I've been dying to learn it. I've been doing that very, very slowly, but I love to see its adoption at Apollo and us making use of such a good language. Cool. So I guess without further ado, how do you want to kick this off, Jake? Do you want to just like talk maybe a little bit about like why it was born? Like what's the deal with the current CLI and how does this fit in? I think that'd be probably a good place to start.
Yeah, I think so too. So many people are familiar with the Apollo CLI that we currently have. It provides a lot of features for working with graphs, for working with the Apollo Studio API, such as things like pushing changes to graphs, checking changes against existing graphs, as well as running things like client checks, registering client operations to verify that they're actually valid. The existing Apollo GraphQL CLI does a lot. And we were noticing that as our customer base, the people using Apollo continued to grow, that we ran into a lot of limitations with the existing CLI. A couple of them being errors. We didn't have great error messaging or error handling abilities baked into the Apollo CLI, and that was something that we spent a lot of time trying to fix. But we realized that we were having a lot of problems doing that. The Oak Cliff framework and TypeScript that we were using are fantastic and they're really nice, but we didn't exactly set ourselves up for a lot of success in handling errors earlier on. So going back and adding those things later is really difficult. But we noticed as people were using languages other than JavaScript to write GraphQL services more and more frequently, and clients that didn't involve GraphQL or didn't involve JavaScript, that it got challenging to encourage people to install Node.js in their environments just to use the Apollo CLI.
What?
Our old
No
installation
way.
methods. Yeah, right? Yeah, you're totally asking Kotlin people to install Node to run a CLI is not a good idea. Just as an example, but no, really, like asking somebody to install Node as an iOS developer and asking them to interact with NPM, Node's product package manager, as someone who doesn't know Node, that's a pretty steep ask. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons that we went with Rust, is that its build options, its distribution options give us a lot more flexibility as to like who can actually use it, how they can install it, including in like custom CI environments, whether you're running in Circle or Jenkins or GitHub Actions. Like, it should be easy to install a CLI tool, especially one meant to run in CI very often. So between errors, between distribution options, performance, just the sheer performance jump of a compiled language like Rust with memory safety over something like TypeScript and JavaScript, like it just gave us a ton of options.
Yeah.
So we explored quite a few different routes that we could have taken to improve the Apollo CLI, and and I think at the end of the day we made the right choice in that actually starting up afresh and taking what we learned with the Apollo CLI and trying to move forward and build something better is actually served us very well. And where we're at right now, just as like a piece of context here, we're currently on our second a public preview of Rover.
Yeah. Zero.
That's why if you go
0.2.
yeah. Yeah. Which is why, like, since it is a public preview right now, we're not being super aggressive and trying to tell everybody, oh, hey, you should go use this right now in production, because that might not go well for you, just as a little disclaimer. But it's also why if you try to find the Rover docs through our normal like docs navigation stuff, they might not show up for you, or they won't show up for you if you try to find them that way. So if you want to learn about like the Rover's like public preview. Actually, Kurt, you have it open if you want to show your screen right now.
Yeah, let's do that. Hang on, let me flip over to that. And I've already linked. I'll grab the link again. Hang on, let me flip us over. Yeah, there we go. So I've got the docs open, and I in case anyone has joined since I dropped that link, I'll do it again. So like you can go, like the docs exist, they're there. They're just not surfaced at the top level of navigation. So you can definitely go and check it out. But yeah.
Yeah. And if you go here, it's apollographql.com/docs/rover. You can also find this if you go to our GitHub page and look for look for Rover under Apollo GraphQL, or even on our Twitter. We posted a couple of weeks ago about the first public preview, linking to this docs page. But this tells you what the public preview is, how it works, and we actually haven't even announced the second public preview yet. Like, it's out for most people, but we haven't publicly posted anything about it yet because we're still having to sort out some issues with code signing and macOS. What is it? Big Sur. That's it.
Yeah.
Names.
Right.
So so if you are on Big Sur, there would be a couple extra steps you'd actually have to do to actually execute the binary that we distribute. So just be on the lookout for that. In the next day or so, we should be posting about the second public preview, as well as changelog links where you can go and see everything we've been up to.
Yeah, and I've been using Rover CLI for about 2 weeks now. It's been a great experience, and so the reason kind of we're doing the stream, right? Like it's public preview. It's not, and I accidentally had introducing the Rover CLI, but I changed it to previewing, like because some people brought up some good points. This is in no way like a release, but it is able to be used, and you using it would be amazing because feedback would be super helpful as we continue to develop this. So if you are so inclined and want to check it out, Blade said I'm on Little Sur. Me too, actually.
Yeah, I'm still on Big Sur, you're fine.
Yeah, I'm still on Little Sur too. But yeah, so definitely please check it out. And then honestly, just go look at the repo if you're interested in like command line apps being built in Rust. It's a really good source there. So yeah. I've been considering upgrading, so like not to derail us too far, but like I've downloaded like the update for Big Sur, and I just still haven't installed it because I'm just like, oh, what if one thing like doesn't work that I drastically need? It's it's over. I'm super hype on the M1 laptops as well, but same thing. I'm like, what if like OBS doesn't work or something, just like something doesn't work that like I rely on every single day. I'd be pretty upset. Yeah.
I luckily I did upgrade to Big Sur on my Mac, but luckily most of my work these days are done on PC. So PC where everything's always broken, so it's fine. I joke. PC's fine. But yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So I think next steps is maybe we just we'll go take a look at the CLI. So full disclaimer, just because of like the Big Sur stuff, like I've already installed. So I'm on V2 of Rover here. So if I do boop Rover, we can see it's installed. I am on version 2, but we just wanted to make sure we didn't spend X amount of minutes at the start of the stream trying to get it to work right. Actually, that probably might have been useful for all you big Sur folks out there. But yes, at the same time, it's a preview. We just kind of want to show what's going on. The first thing I'm noticing is just the output right from the gate is beautiful, right? So, it's very descriptive. It's got a lot of great information going on here, letting me know like exactly how I'm going to use this. I just want to shout out like the attention to detail. I mean, this is, like I said, I've been using it for 2 weeks. I had basically no issues. Only one that was like kind of my own fault with dealing with NPX, but yeah. I've had no issues with it. I actually have federated some GraphQL APIs that are backing my website and my stream layout and stuff like that. And so I've been using Rover to manage the CI/CD of my data graph for that, and I'm using managed federation, so it's also helping me get that stuff into Apollo Studio, and Apollo Studio is pushing my changes out to like my API gateway, which we'll get a little bit more into how all of that is going later in the stream. But yeah, the very first thing that I noticed was like the commands were very clear. It was very easy to figure out what was going on. We got the nice help command as we should. And I just what was it like switching from JavaScript to Rust? Like how hard was that to like build this?
Oof. Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, I guess, because Rust has a pretty steep learning curve. I mean, if you're coming from a dynamic language that kind of lets you do whatever you want to do, like JavaScript, even TypeScript, yes, it's typed, but it still kind of lets you do whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Hashtag any.
Moving to something, hashtag any. Oh, goodness. Yeah, but switching to Rust to begin with it's pretty steep. But I really want to give a shout out to everybody that I've been working with. People on the team, Rover and Arena, Rover and Arena, Avery and Arena. I guess Rover's kind of a teammate at this point, but they both have way more Rust experience than I do. I've been working on Rust for less than a year at this point. I'm getting all my R's confused. If you can't tell, Rust, Rover, Avery, Arena. Yeah, a lot of R's. But yeah, having the experience of them around, as well as Ashley early on in the process, having people who know what they're doing has been extremely helpful. But for all the difficulties that we found along the way using Rust, I think the in a lot of ways the frustrations of using Rust are also its strengths. It makes it pretty hard to do stupid things.
Yeah.
So it's really saved us a lot. It's saved us a lot of testing work that we would otherwise have to do in any variation of JavaScript that you want to pick. So yeah, I think it's been a win, and the performance gains. Goodness, I mean, our old JavaScript CLI, I did it as an experiment one day. I stripped it down to nothing but hello world. No command logic was even loaded into the bundle. I built it in release mode. It took a half second for the CLI to even start up and print out a version.
Wow.
Whereas I don't know if any command in Rover actually takes a half second to completely run. So,
I have not seen that myself. It's been extremely fast, extremely fast, instantaneous.
So it's
a big
win.
Yeah, a good proof of case is just by doing Rover, even without the command, it just is there, right? It's immediate feedback. And we'll get into some subdirectors. Actually, why don't I CD on into projects, and then I think I have the worst. Yeah, here we go. Boom. No regrets. Cool. So now we're
your name gets me every time.
Yeah. I use main in most cases, but this is when we were first moving away from master, and I was like, I'm gonna do no regrets. Do I have it should be clean. Okay, cool. There we go. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure before I start doing things, I'm not stepping on stuff. But yeah, so we're in here. I have a bunch of And actually, I wouldn't even need to be in this directory because I could just run the command. So the cool thing, all right, I'm getting ahead of myself, but like now that I'm authenticated, like now that Rover knows who I am as a user, I could just go ahead and run a bunch of commands. Like I don't even know why I CD'd into this directory. Like I could still just work with my graph from anywhere on my PC now that I have Rover installed. So let's actually, that sounds like a great segue. Let's start going through like, what does Rover have available to us and how might we use it? What's the first thing you kind of want to show off here about Rover?
Yes, I think the first thing is the configuration story in Rover versus the configuration story in the past with the Apollo CLI or VS Code is way different, dramatically different. The Apollo CLI, it aimed to make the actual commands that you type out as short as possible, meaning most things were abstracted away to config files. And Rover kind of takes the opposite approach to that, of most options actually being passed through flags or passed through environment variables if you need to overwrite something specific. But yeah, I think if we just like went ahead and looked at the actual config subcommand and see what's available to us and see how it works. You said you're already authenticated. So what that actually means is Apollo Studio is what this CLI actually like communicates with back and forth most of the time for most commands. And in order to actually do that, we have API keys that you can set up in Apollo Studio. And then this config like subtree of commands in a lot of ways deals with those API keys. So if you look at the subcommands there at the bottom, you have things like auth, clear, delete, list, who am I, show. These are all commands to help you work with what we call profiles. And if you want to, I guess we can see what profiles you currently have set up by just running rover config list. And this will just, config list. And it'll show you, what you actually have saved right now. Right now, you have, this is, I guess, would be probably the biggest use case is just the default profile. And, I guess a good question here would naturally be, what is a profile? Like, what is a config profile?
That's what I was going to ask.
Great question. Yeah, see, and I mean, I think right now you could just think of profiles as a set of global configurations. So rather than having a config file with an API key saved in it, this is just a global, a global set of config that lives at your home directory. You can change where this lives if you really want to, but it lives in your home directory. And right now, the only thing that's actually a global config option is your API key. So if right now we don't have anything else globally saved outside of environment variables, which are, I guess, technically global. But yeah, so I guess what you would normally run into when you first launch Rover for the very first time, or if you try to run a command without any configuration saved, is it would ask you to generate an API key. And you can actually run this if you just run rover config auth and don't pass anything to it. It'll instruct you, and if you don't actually follow the instructions, it won't overwrite what you currently have. But if you run this auth command, you see it tells you where to go. It tells you to go to Studio and generate a personal API key. And this is just an API key that applies to any graph, any organization that you have access to. And then all you have to do is just copy and paste it into the prompt, and it automatically saves it under the default name. And if you don't have to like type default everywhere throughout the app, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, and I could have changed the name, so it asked me if I want it to go to my default. So you could have like your own personal profile, your work profile, like any of the, or if you're doing like contract work, right, like profiles for your clients, like stuff like that. And it's not an uncommon pattern for CLIs, right? So like a lot of AWS stuff works like this. I believe other ones like, I can't remember if Netlify's CLI works like this too or not, but a lot of them do this. Like it's a pretty common pattern. So yeah, I'm going to Control C out of it for now. But
smart.
So I just want to take 1 second to talk about like what this means for API keys. So in Apollo Studio, you have two types of API keys. You have your personal API key, which you can think of as kind of like admin privileges, right? Like Rover needs to do a lot of things on your behalf. It can work with multiple different graphs, not just a single one. And so in that case, you need to use a personal API key to make sure that it has the right permissions to do the things that it needs to do. On the flip side to that is oftentimes when you're working with a graph in something like a CI/CD environment within like a given particular service or something like that, you actually want your service key. And so we'll take a look a little bit about that later, but I just wanted to clear that up for folks at home as kind of like the key on keys.
Yeah, it's just, I like to think of it as like a keys scope, a personal API keys scope is like global to anything you have access to. Yeah. Pretty much, yeah. Whereas a service API keys scoped specifically to a single service, and can even have like certain roles set to it, so that it's, it's not allowed to do certain things to the graph. But
yeah, but we'll spare you the in-depth on permissions, policies, and authorization.
Please, I don't know if I'm qualified to talk about that fully. But I think a good thing to do, we've actually added a couple debugging like tools into Rover to help you set this up. So like one thing that I did one time on accident is, when I ran Rover config auth and it asked me to paste in my API key, I accidentally pasted it 3 times because I didn't know that it was a thing. Or I didn't know that it pasted correctly. I thought I messed something up. So I pasted it 3 times and I went to run the command and it was like, that's not going to work. So we actually added in some debug utilities to help you figure out, if that's what happened, if you just mistyped your key, if there's actually something more serious wrong.
Oh, no way.
And so one of those is actually if you run rover config who am I, this tells you the information about the key's identity. It doesn't, leak anything secret up here, so it's fine if you say it. But it tells you, hey, this is a user key, and it tells you the user ID. It's, it's pretty minimal. If you had a service key in here, it would tell you that the key type is a graph, and it would tell you the graph's unique, like globally unique ID, as well as the graph's like title, as we call it, the display title, what you'd see in Studio. So this is kind of like step 1. If you run into like authentication errors, just like go here and make sure that your key is actually accurate. As well as like there's also I would not recommend doing this on stream, but the rover config show, it'll actually show you the contents, right? I think it actually hides sensitive information by default unless you pass the -- sensitive flag to it. But regardless, since there's only one thing in the profile right now, everything is sensitive, so it wouldn't really.
I'm just gonna bring it over here, and I'm sorry. I need to know what it does. I'm so curious.
It shouldn't tell you sensitive stuff. If it does, we need to have a separate, a separate disclaimer about being public preview again.
Yeah, and so it gave me an error. It said no non-sensitive. I can bring this over. So here's what it does. So it says, no non-sensitive configuration found for profile default. Try rerunning with the command sensitive flag, and then that would show me my key and some other stuff. Very
nice.
Cool.
So I want to pause and say this is actually a good point to like demonstrate or show one way we actually approach error handling inside of Rover.
Yeah.
So if you look, we ran into an error. It printed out error as you'd hopefully expect. It gives you the error description, error no non-sensitive configuration found for profile default. And then for as many errors as we can possibly track down, we're adding more and more as we go. It actually tries to provide you with a suggestion that you can do to actually resolve the error. So the second line you see there is actually a suggestion for this error saying, try rerunning this command with a sensitive flag. Other suggestions for other things might be, hey, we couldn't find this graph. Like, are you sure you're using the right graph name? Are you sure you're using the right API key?
API key.
Yeah, the right. Yeah, so we actually try to like walk you through a little bit more of the errors rather than just saying, oh, undefined. I hate to hear it.
Or
and that's like
even better yet, error, and then just stack trace.
Yes. So that's always a fun time.
Yeah,
but, we have we'll show later, but we have you can see trace information, debug logs if you really want to.
Yep.
That is helpful.
It is helpful sometimes, just not all the time. Sometimes I just want to know like what I did wrong. It's like,
well, you don't want to see when a connection was closed at the HTTP level. Like, is that not relevant?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like. I think this is also a good point that we can show. If you look at just like the help docs for any of the rover config commands. If you did rover config auth -- help, for example, there we go. Yeah, so you can see here at the very bottom, the last option that we have available is profile. And this is actually in any command that uses an auth token in any way, which right now is,
Pretty
I
much
think,
all.
all of them. Yeah, I think it's all of the actual like graph subgraph commands use this. This is actually how you select a profile. If you're using default, like earlier when Kirk typed Rover config auth, he didn't type -- profile Apollo or -- profile work. So like it got saved as the default profile without him having to do anything. And the same thing goes to, whenever you go to run a command, you don't have to type profile default every single time. It just, if you're using the default profile, it just picks up default. So that's one little configuration like tweak that, if you're using multiple keys, which some people might be, especially if you're dealing with multiple accounts or different users, like, that very well might be a thing.
It's very common. Yeah, I can't imagine
Very
that it's
common.
not very common. Yeah. Yeah, profiles are like, I feel like profiles in this day, in the year of our Lord 2021, or somebody's Lord anyway, not having profiles like seems weird to me. Like Twitch, they don't have like a good profile switcher. I have to like log out and log back in every time. And it's like, I would love to have like profiles, and it's just, maybe that's just me because I do DevRel, and so like I have like 50 accounts for everything, and so I feel the brunt
Sounds
of
like
that.
a nightmare, honestly.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm a big fan of anything that supports like profiles out of the gate. It's nice.
Yeah. And I think like, with this discussion of profiles, with this talk about like auth and how you actually set up auth, like it makes sense to talk about the user case where you're running in a CI, which is very common. You don't have the ability, typically at least, to interact with the CLI. We ran the auth command earlier and opened up an interactive prompt where you pasted your API key and set up a profile. That's not, available to you in a CI. So if you hop back over to the docs page and go to configuration, the fourth item down the left, it actually talks about how to actually set up an API key after you obtain it. Provide the API key to Rover. You can do it via the auth command. Or you can actually do it via a environment variable, which I don't even.
Did I miss it? Wait, no. It does have it here. Here we go.
It does have it here. Yeah. So this is a list of all of our environment variables. These are the things that you might want to override. Like if you for some reason can't save config like profiles inside of your home directory for some reason, you can actually change that. And then likewise, if you have an Apollo key, which you probably will in a CI, you have an API key that you want to use, you can just provide it as an environment variable, and Rover will automatically pick that variable up and use it. So very, very helpful. As well as, quick disclaimer, if you want to turn off telemetry, that's also an option here, as well as some version control overrides if you don't want to like send us your remote or branch or commit, or if you want to give us something else for those things, you always can. But these are environment variables, are kind of overrides for other configuration that already exists elsewhere.
Yeah, and like you were saying, if you want to drop that config somewhere else than the default, you just set this environment variable, and there it will go. Yep. Nice.
Yeah. So that's I guess crash course on any and all things configuration. Every command has custom options and flags that you can always show using help, but those are like the big ticket items for configuring. And if you want to see more about that, just read the docs. We've tried to make them as thorough as possible. At least you can never get everything, but
Yeah, well, docs are a thing that are ever evolving and expanding, right?
And terrifying sometimes. We try to be friendly,
Yeah, it's hard. But it's hard to strike the balance of anyway, we're not going to get into another derailment on technical writing and the challenges of it.
Or we could.
I mean, I think folks might be here for it. It's a very hot topic. It's a good topic, but
true.
Yeah.
Let's debate verb tense.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. Cool. So we've covered kind of something that I'm noticing right here, which is really cool, which is like the log level. So like when we take that command that I ran, it's like you were saying, like you try to be very helpful and you don't expose me to just like raw output of like what is happening with this error. But there are times, like especially if we circle back to CI/CD, like if something's not going right, like, and it's not building, and it's not because like the command is failing because like Studio is saying like, hey, this isn't working. Like if you're having issues with the CLI, how do you investigate that? How do you get deeper into figuring out what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We can actually show an example of an error later and like actually see what this looks like and how it like actually can help you debug.
Cool.
But yeah, we have 5 different log levels. This is I think we followed the most common pattern that we could find for log levels. By default, if you're just a normal user, not passing anything to the CLI, you're running things just for funsies and nothing's going wrong in the world, it'll show you errors, warnings, and just info logs. Those are just basic things like an info log, for example, would be like kind of step-by-step instructionals of like, oh, we're pushing this schema to Studio, you know. But then we have, if you want to go into debugs, that gives you a little more information that you can use to like help yourself figure out what actually went wrong, see if there was some like parsing error on your schemas, whatever it might end up being that might show up in your debug logs. But then if you're debugging stuff like proxies and you're trying to figure out, is this my fault on my machine or my network versus this Rover's fault, like, you know, seeing traces, you know, might be more helpful for you. So, but most people probably don't want to see traces because they're disgusting, honestly. They're all over the place. But they're there if you want them.
What are Rust
Hopefully
errors
you don't.
like? I mean, I'm asking because I don't really know Rust. Like, you know, I'm familiar with JavaScript, and they're not that pleasant. Stack traces are a big pain. What are Rust errors like?
Yeah, so it's not a straightforward conversation. But I mean, errors in Rust come in two varieties, really. You have your panics, which are kind of unrecoverable errors, which are things that like, this is actually a real genuine bug in the app. These are ideally things that you'd never see.
Okay.
So hopefully when you're running Rover, you won't see panics. But Rust is very deliberate on giving you these recoverable errors that you can actually, it's like an implementation of error interface, and you can actually handle these in like what they call result types, which are either a success case or an error case, and we use these all over the place. And error cases, unlike in TypeScript, error cases in Rust always have to be handled explicitly. So you have to say, if you're ignoring an error in Rust, it's because you deliberately told Rust that you're not going to handle, like you're not going to do anything. It's just a no. Yeah. So it makes it a lot harder to actually just skip over and accidentally not handle errors.
Well, that's cool. That's nice.
It's phenomenal. Yeah, it's the only reason we're able to handle errors in such a way we are and give the suggestions like we are, is that, you know, it's very aggressively pro error,
which is amazing to have built in at the language level, first of all. And second of all, was that part of the Rust decision? You know, like, did you all discover this before you picked Rust, or you know, was it like a happy accident that you found this out?
So the decision to like pick Rust in general was one that that we looked at a while back, or early 2020, and it was definitely a part of the conversation. Like, we had a couple top tier goals for whatever we ended up doing with the Apollo CLI. There were a couple goals that we had. One, it has to be distributable to non-node users, and like up there along with that, it has to be performant and it has to have good errors. It has to have good error handling strategies, because that was something that we sunk, you know, weeks or months of time worth into trying to resolve in the Apollo CLI and the VS Code extension. That's just really difficult. So we really wanted there to be a clear story, and Rust, like, it was very obvious very quickly that Rust gave us a lot of tools for handling errors appropriately.
Nice. That's cool. It's awesome.
Yep.
And okay, cool. So we've kind of covered log levels. We've covered how you config this thing. It seems like it's like time to figure out, what does Rover do right now? What is it capable of?
Yeah.
Show me what you've got. Isn't that like
Show me what you got? So right now, Rover really targets a specific audience, and that's I guess what you consider like typical backend server developers running GraphQL. So if you're building a GraphQL server.
I have a graph in production.
Yeah, so it's graph in production users. If you're developing a GraphQL server, goodness, what am I saying? If you're developing a GraphQL server, and right now specifically, if you're defining your schema using SDL. The Apollo CLI, it does, you know, it works. I'm not going to say it does a great job. It works with introspection, fairly flexibly, allows you to do a lot of things with introspection. But right now, Rover, we're actually building out the introspection features right now. But for the time being, for this public preview, if you're trying to use Rover, you really need to be using SDL or have access to some means of producing SDL from your server.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Which is what I tend to use anyway. I'm a fan. And so when we talk about SDL, what we're really saying is like your schema needs to be defined like in a schema file. Like it can't be buried in like, schema equals, string template literal inside of my index.js file or whatever language. And then we try and pull it out. So that's what that means. And so if you've actually never really seen that or, aren't quite familiar with what that means, if we go here to this here service, and then if I go to, that's website, not website service. My bad. Website service. You'll see I have a schema.graphql. And so this is defining my schema for the service. And because I have it in a file, Rover knows what to do with it.
Yep. Yeah, so this is exactly what we're looking at. That's a good point. We actually do some magic and extract SDL from source files in the Apollo CLI right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of magic.
It's really nice. Yeah, it's really convenient, but it does run into a lot of issues. And in part of our wanting of Rover to kind of be a language agnostic tool, like it doesn't care what language you're using to build your server. It just cares that you have GraphQL capabilities. You have either SDL or you have introspection in the future available to you. So we've kind of opted from staying far away from interpreting and stepping through ASTs of other languages for now, and hopefully for quite the future.
Yeah, because I mean, it raises a lot of challenges, right? Because it's like you have to support all the languages, which what does that even mean? First of all, like who knows who's using GraphQL and what? And so I think it's interesting if you're supporting SDL and then, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the future introspection, right? It provides you with two very common and great avenues to work with the CLI. And actually Rover has some things built into it, or at least planned, that will make it easier to deal with introspection and getting the SDL from there. Is that correct? Like you'd be able to push introspection like with standard out, like into like pipe into a file if you wanted to or something? Yeah, okay.
Yes. So yeah, I think one of the things that people often want to do with GraphQL is like, I have this running server, like, some languages you don't build a schema using SDL, like certain frameworks. You don't build a schema using SDL, but other tools, for example, like GraphQL code generator or something, might need SDL to work, which I think they actually use introspection too, but that's besides the point. But yeah, maybe you need a GraphQL file for something else, or whether you want to commit it to a repo or you want to do something else with it. That's a very common need, is to like take that introspection and turn it into SDL. And typically that's not the most straightforward thing to do. So we're actually, at all. We're actually, building out a command right now. I don't know the exact naming or where it's going to live, whether it'll be under a graph or subgraph or anything. But it's an introspect command that allows you to point it at an endpoint, pass it headers if you need to, and actually, query your endpoint for your SDL, and it'll spit it back out to you. And then what you do with that spit out SDL, whether it be save it to a file or pipe it into another command or pipe it back into Rover.
Pipe it into cow say. That's what I would do with it.
I mean, that's what I do with most things. So yeah, that's definitely something that we aim to work with in Rover, is that we give you this interface for working with SDL, and what you do with it is up to you. We don't aim to building custom means of saving and loading all kinds of files and doing weird things with it. We just want to say, hey, here's SDL. You can you send it wherever you want to.
Yeah. And so in my mind, like this is correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm like trying to channel my inner Jake, and it's like I remember when you came on stream about a year ago. Actually, now it's really close to a year from today. And we did a whole stream on like how to configure Apollo config.js for many different types of projects. And I just remember being like, damn, like you gotta there's a lot of different ways you can configure this. And it's just interesting to see like that has affected what has been created here, if that makes sense, because this is a lot more flexible. It leaves the power to you at the individual command level. You know, this will work no matter what folder or file you're in, you know, and it's just, it really changes like the control really that you have over the CLI. And I mean that to say that like Rover feels like I have a lot more control, which is nice.
Yeah. It feels less magical. Which
does feel less magical.
That's very intentional. We wanted to remove some of the magic because when it comes to configuring tools, especially tools that deal with, you know, fairly complicated project structures, like, you know, a monorepo hosting a GraphQL client or 12 and a whole bunch of like microservices running GraphQL, like configuring a CLI to like dig through those files and do things automatically for you, it's really messy really quick.
Yeah, especially just like when it's a very common pattern with CLIs to use commands, subcommands, flags. Like this is not anything new, right? Like, you know, it's pretty common, especially for anyone who's worked with Docker. Like you ever used Docker before? Like honestly, Rover feels kind of like the Docker CLI in some ways, in a good way.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a compliment.
It is. It's definitely a compliment. Yeah.
And like, and that's nice because I mean, at the end of the day, let's be honest. Like, especially if you're in a CI, you have to. But like, even locally, a lot of people are scripting away these commands to begin with. You know, they scripted away in npm scripts or the equivalent for your framework that you're using, Gradle or whatever it might be. But most of the time, people aren't hand running all these commands anyway. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible to set up, configure the first time, and you know, at the end of the day, like most people are hitting up arrow to rerun the command or scripting it away anyway. So if there's a couple extra flags there, and those flags are actually helpful and describe what the command is doing, like that's a win. It's not huge. It's not a big problem for us.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, like it's like you said, most people are doing these commands, you know, scripted away, but like the main environment in which you'll be using something like Rover is CI, right? Like this is really a tool to help you, you know, have continuous integration and deployment for data graphs. And like you want the tool that you're using to work extremely well in that environment. And I would take it working really well in CI and being slightly more verbose for me to type things out any day of the week.
Yeah. But I mean, even running locally, it's like it makes it
3 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, in a way, it kind of like shortens the feedback loop if you're trying to like test and change commands and trying to find exactly what you want to do with a command. Like, it takes less time to change a flag than to go to a config file or find a config file, open the config file, save the config file, make sure you're in the right config file, and then rerun the command, you know, and interpret the feedback. So, I mean, it shortens the feedback loop, even if it is a longer command.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely it does. So, sorry, I got something in my throat. I guess a frog, right?
Hairball.
Rabbit, yeah, hairball. Probably. I have so many animals in this house. Probably hairball. But yeah, so let's take a look at this thing. Let's start to we can approach this two ways. So we can just like further to continue to go through the commands, or we could dig into what I've got set up, or we could do one and then the other. Like it's really the world is our oyster. So it's really up to you. What do you think is the best route to kind of show off what you can do today with this?
So you said you already have a graph pushed, right? Like in Studio?
Yeah, so let's go take a look. So
can we see that?
Yes, we can. We can see that. So in here, I have my worst dev graph, the worst dev. I should name it the worst graph. That'd be really funny. But it's back in like the worst dev, like, you know, environment. So that's why I called it that. So we can see here that I have my reference. So this is just gonna define all the things that are available. Before, when I was talking about that change log that you get and why you would want to use Studio, this is what I'm talking about, which is one of my favorite features, if I'm being honest.
It's fantastic.
It seems so simple, but it is amazing. I can come in here and see every single change to my graph since I have registered it. And it's nice. I'm not going to lie. But what we can also do, where are you? Services. So I'm using a federated graph. So I have two services. So we have the Twitch service, and then we have the website service. So we have both of these available. So I have a nice federated graph. We can go in here into Explorer, and we can, let me fold this up, give us a little breathing room, right? So we can run our queries and do all of that fun jazz. So we've got some information to work with. I also have this set up. It was CI/CD through GitHub Actions, so we can go take a look at what my deployments and stuff looks like. It's really up to you, like where we go from here.
Yeah. So I think a good distinction that you'll run into fairly quickly that we can walk through in Rover is the difference in a graph versus a subgraph.
Good call. Yeah.
Yeah, and since this is a federated graph already, it has multiple services, which we call subgraphs, multiple subgraphs. We can actually walk through this distinction fairly well. So in your URL bar, you see your after graph / you see your graph ID. Note that this is usually different than the graph name. So the name of your graph, the title, like the display title of your graph, like you mentioned, was the worst dev. But the actual like globally unique identifier of your graph is the worst dev Python something Z1N1VN. Great. Yeah. So perfect. So yeah, we can actually just go ahead and grab that graph ID there, because we're going to be using that all over the place. Grabbed. And hop back over to Rover, and we can actually try a couple different things here. So if you want to actually run Rover graph fetch with that graph ID, just paste it as the argument. Yep, and just run it. Just see what happens.
Hey,
fetching SDL.
Look at that.
It just, yeah, perfect. So we have a couple top level commands and then a couple sub commands under that. So we have a graph as a top level command, and then what do you want to do on a graph? In our case, we just want to fetch it. And the difference here is that a graph is, a monolithic or a composed graph, like the final product, what your client actually sees. Yeah. So, if you have a web service, or if you have a web app going to go fetch against a GraphQL server, this is what your client sees. This is what your client knows exists. Yep. Likewise, if you're running a monolithic graph and you don't have multiple subgraphs, you're always working with a graph. You don't have to worry about subgraphs at all. But in the case of a federated graph like we have, if you want to fetch just the whole composed graph, like
that's this,
you can use the Rover graph command to fetch the whole graph. That makes sense. Yep. Likewise, if you run, or actually, I'll mention this is also a useful thing here. You'll notice this kind of looks ugly at first. It just spit it out to to standard. What is this? Standard error.
Standard out.
Standard error.
Yeah.
No, standard out. Right. I get standard out and error confused all the time. Probably not a great a great strength for a CLI developer, but yeah. So it just spits it out to standard out. You see, like the very first line that says SDL : that's going to standard error, whereas the rest of this is going to standard out. And what that allows you to do is, like, if you want to save this to a file, like all you have to do is pipe that standard out to a file. So you could run the exact same thing, Rover graph fetch with the graph ID, and then do the the greater than, and pipe it to whatever you want to, like nonsense or schema, like GraphQL. I don't know if you're gonna accidentally overwrite something.
No, I'm not. But, I'm in the root directory, so I'm totally good here to do what I need to do.
So yeah, it just spits it out to schema.graphql, and this is kind of what I was talking about. In that Rover kind of lets you deal with output as you want. If you want to pipe it to a file, that's great. If you want to pipe it back into Rover, do something else with it, you can also do that.
Ooh, I want to do what I said. Let me see if I have, I'm going to pipe this into Cowsay. But then for that, I do like this, right?
Well, I don't know. What are you trying to do with Cowsay?
Oh, oops. I crashed Rover. I'm sorry. I was trying to pipe my entire SDL into Cowsay. I don't think it liked it.
Why did that crash Rover? That's a great question.
I think it's not right that it crashed Rover, because I think the pipe probably failed, and if the whole command fails, it's probably Rover saying
what's that? This is a great use case. It actually did crash it. Like you can say, Houston, we have a problem. Rover crashed.
Yeah.
If you're piping into Cowsay and you break Rover and you notice this is a problem, we give you this disgustingly long URL. You can copy copy it, see what happens. This disgustingly long URL, copy the whole thing and just open it in GitHub and see what we have here. This is another great error handling use case we can talk about. If you run into an error and you want to report it to us, please do. You can paste it in, and it gives you an issue template already filled out with exactly everything we need to know. Stack trace, the error message, where it happened in our source code.
Hold up. Yo, this is so wild. This is awesome. I'm sorry. I'm just blown away. This is I had no idea it did this. This is the above and beyond. This is is nice enough to get good errors, but to have them literally drop everything into a report for you to get this whole thing started. I'm sorry, that's really cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, we absolutely like when I say we've spent a significant amount of time trying to figure out the error story, like that's not an exaggeration. Like we spent a lot of time on this. So this is actually this actually allows us, like it says here, panic occurred in file library standard source IO standard IO.rs. It tells us, exactly where we can go to find this. So we really wanted to shorten the feedback loop between somebody running into an error and us being able to resolve it. And this helps us not have to go back and forth 10 times in an issue asking them for more and more information about what happened.
Yeah. For real quick, 1 sec. Thank you so much for the sub, service, digital Callis. Did I get that right? I hope so. But anyway, thank you for the sub. That's awesome. So thank you so much. But yeah, so Kyle brought up a good point. I probably should have used grep or something and not like calsay, but regardless, here we are.
We can show an example later where we actually used Rover.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I mean it'll but yeah, so Rover supports standard in, piping things to standard in, as well as it by default a lot of times it reports to standard out where you can pipe to other things.
I just gotta know if this will work. Like grep, and then do I have to do quotes? I can't remember. Isn't it like this or something, right?
I don't think so.
Or you just do the word?
I think it's just the word. I could be wrong.
Okay, and now look at that. So because I didn't I probably don't have calsay installed. I bet that's the issue. That's why.
That'll do it.
That's why. That is awesome.
Yeah, it's super handy. Honestly, it's great.
I just pulled my schema from Apollo Studio.
Your composed schema.
Composed schema from Apollo Studio, and then just searched for it locally, just like, hey, mind my own business. Just like grepping things. That's cool.
Yeah.
This is dope.
So let's say you wanted to, instead of the whole composed schema, let's say you just wanted to go grab a subgraph schema. Yeah. So like the website service, if you wanted to just go download the website services schema, it looks very similar. I mean, it's Rover, instead of graph fetch, it'd be subgraph fetch. Yes, backspace all the way. Rover subgraph fetch, and then after
name, right?
At the very, so this is where you need to define the name of the subgraph you're trying to fetch from, because we have the whole graph ID. The worst of is the graph ID, but we want to know, what subgraph are we trying to fetch?
Right?
Here.
Is that how this works? Is it name?
Yep, name, and then just whatever the name of your subgraph is, which we can also
there we go.
We can also list and just see your list of subgraphs.
Oh, yeah, we could do that.
So this is the actual like raw extensions on it or anything.
No, I don't have field extensions yet. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. So no worries. But this is the actual like raw SDL that you'd be writing if you were developing a federated service that has like the key directives, the external directives, and stuff on it. So this is like the piece of this is the piece of the graph, the subgraph that you're actually pushing to Studio, which also can be very useful. If you're trying to do something like a good example would be if you're trying to migrate one subgraph schema to another graph, for example. If you're trying to take
interesting.
If you're trying to take your website services subgraph and actually publish it to another graph altogether, you could just fetch the subgraph schema, pipe it to Rover graph push Rover subgraph push, and publish it somewhere else. Like it's definitely.
Oh my goodness!
Option.
You can pipe Rover commands to Rover commands.
Oh yeah, very intentionally. Like that's I talked earlier about the like introspection command. That's how we're approaching it. Like introspection is going to spit out SDL just like fetch does. And then what you do with it is up to you. And if you want to pass it back to Rover, we would love that. So, we give you that option.
Wild. I love the name too, Rover. It's so fun.
So
I picture Wally every time.
Or Perseverance,
Oh yeah, or Perseverance. Yeah, that's so much more of
or a dog. It's also a very canine name.
Hey, Rover. Fetch, Rover. Oh.
Yeah. Right? That's I think that naming is actually intentional.
Introspect, Rover. My dog's gonna be staring at me later tonight.
Send your dog to therapy. It comes back introspective. It's like, wait, hold up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the distinction between Rover graph fetch and subgraph fetch. You can actually run So if you want to show the file tree or the command tree differences between graph and subgraph, just do like rover graph help and then rover subgraph help. I think it'll show off a good bit of a difference between the two. So rover graph help has 4 subcommands under it: check, fetch, help, and push. Help, I guess technically is a subcommand.
Help.
Help. So yeah, checking graph changes against a published graph. I mean, you can read these descriptions. I don't need to go through all of these, but these are things you're able to do on a full monolithic, traditional, whatever word you want to use for it, GraphQL schema.
Composed or single schema, we'll say.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing here is there's also, if you run subgraph help, see, there's a couple other commands.
Oh.
So subgraph commands are similar to graph commands. They still have check, fetch, push for the basic operations. If you're trying to check a subgraph change and like what kind of change, how that affects your like composition and whether or not you're going to actually break your entire graph by pushing, you can check it first. But yeah,
smart.
We do have other things you can do, like delete a subgraph. If Kurt decides to retire from Twitch streaming and abandons me on stream alone, he can delete his Twitch service from his graph and just go on about his day. Yeah. Or you can run go ahead and run a list, rover subgraph list, and it'll just print out the subgraphs that like make up your graph.
Oh, but don't I have to pass the graph name?
Yep. Almost always.
Ooh. Yeah.
Not that. Abort.
Oops. I have broken it. Come on, get out of there. Look at this. It won't let me out.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's not a rover thing. That's on you.
Yeah. I forgot that I don't have the ID on my clipboard anymore. Oopsies.
That'll do it. We've also
that'd be a hell of a graph name.
Right? I don't know if Studio would like that very much.
So rover subgraph, but I put the graph in, right?
List before. So the
list before.
The command is rover. Yeah, so the command is rover subgraph list, and
right.
The argument
makes so much sense.
Yeah, the ID is just an argument to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ooh, pretty table.
Right? So this tells you, yeah, exactly. It tells you, hey, these are your subgraphs that you have. You have a website and a Twitch subgraph. It tells you the routing URL, like what your GraphQL gateway actually points to. So whenever your GraphQL gateway receives a request, it figures out how to route the sub pieces of that request to your subgraphs and forwards along the subgraph requests. And this is the routing URL that it actually uses to go to that. And then tells you when it's updated, which is, a handy little tool if you're trying to figure out like, I don't know, a good use case for last updated. Did you accidentally just push something? Let's go check last updated, see if I accidentally broke something. Nice. As well as just, a link to the actual graph in Studio if you want to go see it.
This bothers me to no end that this one is at GraphQL and this one is not, and there's like an actual reason for it.
Okay.
So, do you want to hear it? Do you want to hear why?
Go for it.
It's not that long of a story. Yeah, it's not really like a long story. Coming from the guy that showed secrets on stream. Hey, that was an accident. That was a long time ago, Kyle. Are you ever gonna let me live that down? So what happens is for Twitch service, in order to Todd's face, yeah. Oh, I need to make that an emote on my personal channel. The tots face, 100%. So I have this picture. It's like a joke where like I'm eating the tater tots and sobbing.
Yeah, no, I've seen it.
Oh, tots and sobs. Yeah, I'm gonna turn that into an emote. I want to get a T-shirt made. Anyway. Long story short. Oh crap, where was I going? Oh yeah. So so for Twitch, the way their webhooks work is like you don't just like give them a URL or something. You have to have a server running. Make an API call, send them the URL that you want them to respond to, and then they'll start like, sending your requests to there, and you have to reschedule it every 4 hours. So it will get, we just got memed. So it will go every 4 hours, it has to restart. So in other words, I couldn't just use the bare Apollo server. I needed access to Express, and I needed to add other routes, and so I couldn't just do that, and I had to anyway, long story short, that's why.
I love the meme. I have it open in another window. I just saw it a little delayed. That's great.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, we have a couple different ones. It's pretty cool. They're so much fun. But yeah, you can create memes on the fly and have them show up.
I'm glad I know about that now.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
You'll be hearing from me in the future.
Screamcat and Hacker are my favorite. Hacker is another great one. So let's see. We do meme, Hacker. Boom. Expose the keys.
I was like, give it a little 10-second delay for me here.
Yeah, it takes a little bit to come through, but when it does, it's worth it.
Yeah. Amazing.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. I just haven't come through yet. Oh, there it is.
There we go. Boom.
Perfect. Exposed the keys. Yep, checks out. So yeah, that's a fun little nerdy detail.
Yeah, that's awesome.
About /GraphQL. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, that's the gist of like what we have available to you in a graph versus a subgraph. As a general rule of thumb, if you're working on a federated graph, most of what you're going to be working with is the subgraph commands. If you're working on a monolithic graph, you're never going to touch the subgraph commands.
Yep.
And hopefully the errors are nice enough that if you do use the wrong thing, you'll figure it out fairly quickly. Yep. But if not, let us know.
Yeah. And that means you got to use it. You can't let us know if you don't use it. Yeah. So try it out.
You could let us know something that doesn't exist, but we wouldn't be happy about that. Please don't. Some people just like to watch the world burn.
They do.
But yeah, let's look at something more like meaningful and substantial, other than just like fetching a graph or something. Let's try breaking your graph and see how checks respond.
Yeah, let's break it down. So before we go, okay, so yeah, let's break the graph locally and check it. Right? Is that where we're getting?
Yeah.
At? I like that. Yeah. Let's not go too deep into it. So the first thing I'm going to do though is delete this. Actually, you know what? At this point, I'm just going to bring up VS Code. Let's do that. Shaboopity. Shaboopity boop. Sorry, VS Code is starting, but it's over on the other screen. You can't see it. And now you can see it. Here we go. So let me do some stuff. Let me close some files. Boop. Let me do that. Let me go here.
Ouch, on the right. What kind of... Why?
Wait, what? Why is this saying this is not under version control?
What directory are you in? That's weird.
Yeah, that is weird. All right, new plan. Oh, then it showed up. It just literally showed up. Ugh. Yeah, RTL vibes. Having the other thing on the other side. Oh, let me know if groin shot works, because I don't even know if that command works. I think that meme, so you can do GIFs. So we tried to do like a GIF meme. There's a GIF I made where my son just like groin shots me and floors me. And I recorded it. I caught it on our like Nest Cam. And I was like doing this, like messing with our cat. Like I was gonna, like the cat was like on its little cat thing. He just comes up and just waylays me. Boom. Catches me right in the groin and I just fold like a lawn chair. It was amazing. Okay, great. So here we go. So let me go first and get rid of this new schema that I've added. So we don't want that. So goodbye. All right. So let's go ahead and open some codes. So let's go mess with the website service, because I have a query in there that I use all the time. So I feel like taking that out would definitely cause some problems. So if I go into my schema here and I'm just like, we're not going to let you query for post anymore. That's got to do.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be a problem.
Yeah, that's got to do some damage, right? Like it's like.
Yeah.
All right. So
and I notice.
Go ahead.
I was gonna make a quick note here. I notice you also have all of your types for this service like defined in one file, like one .graphql file.
Yes.
Yeah, that's often not the case. People often like split up their GraphQL files into multiple files and just like define one type or a set of types per file.
Really?
You can still do that, with Rover, although we take like GraphQL files as input, which we'll see here in a second. But you can always like cat together GraphQL files and pipe them straight through to Rover. But probably another sidebar for another day.
I had no idea people did that. Like, that's so funny.
I used to do that. A little bit of anarchist in me, you know.
I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just like it's not a pattern I had seen before. Although I have seen like people break up in code definitions, you know, like so I guess it would only make sense they'd bring that to the SDL as well. Mine aren't exactly huge. Like we have, you know, I took
Yeah.
away a line, so we have 32 lines in all. So yeah. All right.
Oh, that's a lot.
But long story short,
Yeah.
let's CD into website service here. This is where we are. So cannot connect to Docker. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, no, because Docker is not running. So thanks. There's a Docker file. Why would you automatically want to connect to Docker?
You like pain? I don't know.
I don't like pain. And now it's just there every time. That's annoying.
Interesting. Well, you don't have to be in this directory. You could
I
be
know,
in the
but that's
directory.
I'm just sorry. That's just me. Like, so I take it back. You're better than Docker.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we're here. So now I want to check this graph. What do I do?
Yep. So since this is a federated graph and this is technically a subgraph, you're not like checking the entire graph against itself. You can actually run Rover subgraph check and where'd it go? Yeah, Rover subgraph check. And you'll have to get that ID again. I don't know if you have it
Yes.
copy pasted.
I was so scared to
Yeah,
hit paste.
for the record, we're trying to figure out nice solutions for having to paste your having to paste this all the time.
Yeah.
One existing option you could do is you could have it saved as an environment variable and just use like $sign graph or something if you wanted. So little random note, but yeah. So Rover subgraph check, and then it's going to need a couple things. It's going to need the name of the subgraph you're trying to check. So -- name, and this is website service.
Okay. Is that it?
And it's just website.
Yeah.
And then
file.
one more. Actually, I was about to say, actually, just run it and just see what it does. You know, it should error in a not so aggressive way. Great. Yeah. So now you just need to provide it a schema.
Look at that.
So,
Love it. So we hit up.
Yeah. Yep, and run -- schema, and this can either be a file like you have, ./schema.graphql, or if you are using standard in, so if you're piping your SDL from somewhere else,
like
you can just do -- schema hyphen to indicate that you want to use standard
Yeah,
in.
and so I'm not going to derail us into like variants, but in theory, I could compare pull a fetch down a variant of the graph and compare them. Would that work? Does that even make sense?
I think so. I think that makes sense. But yeah, you can absolutely fetch a variant and run check against another variant. But I don't know in the grand scheme of things why.
Why you would? Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, So you can do whatever you want.
You can do whatever you
yeah.
like. Hey.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
yes. Hit it and see what happens. Oh, sorry.
no, you're good. One failure while checking your graph. Look at that. And first of all, freaking lightning quick.
Right?
Lightning, how to do that so fast?
It's just
Magic.
faster than TypeScript.
Magic.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's, there's. Whew.
But I have a failed check, right? And so this is a problem. So I'm going to copy this URL and we're going to go look at the details. So, because like, this is cool, but like, what does a failed check mean, right? So let's go look and figure that out.
Do you have usage like metrics, like traffic reporting for these services?
I do have like that on, but I don't have a ton of traffic, right? So like here, it's going to show me that I do have some requests, but I don't get a ton of traffic by this. I mean, I've just recently configured this, so yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so this is the studio check screen, and it shows you, essentially if you were to commit, if you were to push this changed graph, you would break it in this way. Like you'd say you broke this operation, and has a list of operations in the middle column there, and you can go through and see like who are the clients that are using that operation to see if you actually care about breaking them or not. Yeah. But checks are wildly useful. I think
people fail to realize how powerful of a feature this is. It's just like having the ability to literally know exactly who will be affected by changes in your graph is just mind-boggling. So when I first realized this is what checks were, when like I was like, oh, that's cool, like you can compare. I didn't realize, like, to me it was just like they're comparing the file versus this file, and it's like, oh, something is gone, be weary. But that's not what it's saying. That's what your changelog is for. This is like, hey, you're removing this query, this field on query that's used by like X, Y, and Z clients this amount of times. This is what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's what makes GraphQL like evolvable without having to like make hard version breaks.
Yeah.
If you know nobody's using this field, I mean, it might technically be a breaking change to remove it, but how do you define a breaking change? Like if nobody's using it, it's not breaking. It's not breaking.
Anything. Yeah, exactly. It didn't break anything. It's just gone now. It's only breaking if it actually breaks a client.
Yeah. So checks, wildly useful. It's also fun on the left side, the left column. You see under failed check, you see the name of the service it broke on, website. It tells you who made this check, as well as if you had pushed this and this were running in CI. It actually gives you a link to the commit where this changed. Yeah. So and that's not unique to Rover specifically. That's something you still get from the Apollo CLI. But like that just shows the usefulness of this tab is incredible.
Super incredible. And then I can go look at whatever it is that is there. I can open it and explore, right? And I can like, take a look at that query itself. It's just and this is the thing, like a lot of times people are like, what is Apollo Studio? And hey, Kyle, thank you for joining us, dude. Hope you had fun. Hope you learned something about Rover, and we'll see you later, buddy. So it's just like it's an environment like for managing data graphs. Like this is what Apollo Studio is. It's like a fully integrated service that lets you make sure that you ain't breaking shit.
Exactly. And we just at the end of the day, we just want Rover to be as low friction as possible of a way to interact with this graph manager, with this studio. That's all we aim to be.
And so what's most interesting about this too is like I just ran this locally, so that's cool because like even as a developer, so this is actually a use case where I would want to run Rover locally. I'm not even at the PR point, but I do have if we come back here and we go back to the root, I have CI/CD set up for all of the services here. So the cool thing is like I'm doing this in CI when I create PRs as well. So you can see down here, this time I'm using npx to run Rover, right? Because it's not my computer. I don't have the binary installed, but this is the exact same command, right? We're doing check, we're doing this. I've actually recently found out that I technically don't need this part, although it's nice to be verbose. And then here it is. So this is literally the same command I ran locally, but I get to do this at the PR level. And then I get a nice little, status update on GitHub on my PR. Like, oh, hey, like this failed, this broke.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. Yeah. So now let's see what happens real quick. I want to put this back. So let's put it back. We're going to discard the change.
Well, you mean you don't actually want to break your graph?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
What's wrong with you? Anarchy ensues. Yeah. And I want to run the same command again. Boom. And so now it's saying there's no changes detected, right? And like, that's what we expect. But now let's do something else. Let's add something to here.
Yeah.
And what can I do without having to go write a bunch of code?
I mean, you don't have to write a resolver, right?
No, I don't. I could add another property, and I think as long as nothing runs, it should be okay. And actually, it's local.
Yeah.
So, and we're just checking. So actually, I can add things because I'm not starting it. It's just going to compare my schemas. So I can. So let's do it. Yeah. Let's say not only do I have top posts, but I want bottom posts. I want to be able to share the things nobody's reading.
That's useful.
It is.
I guess. Drive traffic to your
exactly
your losers.
Exactly. Oops, bottom posts. Okay, so now we have this new query method, right? And it's going to return posts as well. What does that give us when we run our checks? So I'm going to clear this because it's getting kind of cluttered. Boom. So now we could see that, yes, it did in fact run. It compared one thing to it, and notice that we've added the query bottom post, but it passed because no downstream clients are affected. So it doesn't matter. I can add on to my graph all day long and like nobody's going to care. It's only when I start breaking things that Apollo Studio is going to be like, hey, the output of this is so beautiful though. I just want to say it's like the right amount of verbosity, like without, is that even a word? If it's not, it should be. But it's like the right amount of detail. I get my link to the full details. And if I had run this in VS Code, I could just command click it and it would take me right to it. And it's very letting me know, right? Against checking proposed subgraph, against this, we compared one schema change against 9 operations because that's the only operations I have. So, but yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. I get you brought it up. That's actually a good point. Let's look at the debug view of this. Like, run it again with the debug flag. Okay. See if there's anything interesting there for us.
So if I do --log debug, right? Is that it?
Yep.
Look at me.
You could also just do -l debug, but I typically end up typing things out long form anyway.
-l. So that's like the short.
Yeah, you could do like the long form of --log or do -l. You know, but you know. I tend to lean more towards the proposed stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So this is a little more ridiculous. But like this kind of information could be super handy depending on what you're doing, for example. Yeah. So if you look let's say go to the keep scrolling down. I think it's near the bottom. Keep going. It might actually be at the bottom. Yeah, so this those blocks right there. So let's say in the future, maybe not right now because we don't have it yet, but the introspect command, you're trying to introspect a running service, and for some reason you're not getting back what you'd expect. Like something's going wrong, you're trying to figure out what happened. Right. Like is it like a broken header? Is it I'm getting a certain error code back from my service? Like what's going on? So like, yeah, just passing debug here, it shows you the request you're making, all the request headers that are actually getting passed, as well as the response header. So it tells you what you're getting back, or the response body, so what you're getting back, the response headers. It really just gives you as much detail as you need to just go back and figure out what went wrong. It's nice.
That is nice. It's really awesome. Super clear and super verbose when you need it. Yeah. When you need it, and that's the key, right? Yeah. That's awesome.
And fun fact, I shouldn't have to say this, but it was originally broken. It doesn't leak any of your API key information.
You know what's so funny?
You log up those things.
If when I did that, when I was logging, and then I was looking at the block, I'm like, fudge, is my API key in there? And I didn't say it out loud because you don't want to draw attention to it, I would have to go change it anyway, but it didn't need to. Yeah. Did not need to.
I was about to say, we were thinking if we ask somebody an issue to copy and paste the debug printout, we don't want them accidentally pasting their API keys out of our GraphQL or in our GitHub issues. Yeah. So yeah, we made sure that we're not printing that anywhere.
Nice. This is so cool.
Yeah.
So real quick, I want to try something. Well, I think we did this already, but I'm going to run all of this command, but I'm going to mess up my ID.
Please do.
Oh, I'm still in debug. Oops. But that's fine. Well, actually, I want to see it without like all the noise. I want to see what it gives me, which I think is just this here, right? Yeah. Yeah. So could not find graph with name. Make sure your graph name is typed correctly and that your API key is valid. Are you using the right profile? Y'all are so thoughtful.
Yeah. So like for that's an important question to ask. Are you using the right profile? Because as a security measure, if you type the wrong service name or wrong graph name in there, we don't want you to know, like for security reasons, if there is a graph with that name. So like let's say X company had a graph published of a new feature or something that they didn't want leaking, you shouldn't be able to query X company dash X feature and see if there's something there. So we can't tell you if the graph ID is wrong necessarily, but we can point you to say, are you using the right profile? Is your graph correct? It gives you the chance to question yourself.
Yeah, which makes a ton of sense. It's like how GitHub shows you a 404 whether it does not exist or you don't have access to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything
Yeah.
else you want to show?
Let me see. I don't
Yeah.
think there's anything massive. Um, I think it'd be interesting to talk about very briefly, just like the graph ref, as we call it, or like the graph identifier that you're passing through to all of these
Oh, yeah,
commands.
yeah. Let's do it.
Uh, this is kind of a new idea that we haven't exposed in a lot of tooling so far, but we've like talked about it internally at the company for a bit.
Cool.
Is this graph ref, the ID that you're passing through these commands? Like if you just up arrow to the command, um, you can see your ID, the graph ID you see is the worst dev dash z1 blah blah blah.
Right.
But let's say you want to like run an operation against a different variant. So in the old CLI, what you'd actually have to do is you have to pass the dash dash variant and pass through a flag specifying the variant that you want to use.
Yeah.
We in this demo so far, we've really only like talked about the default variant, or the variant that's used when you don't pass one. If you hop back over to Studio, you can see that the variant that we've been doing everything against so far is just the current variant. So you might have a current variant, you might have a dev, prod, dev 0 or whatever. Or you might have a variant that has like schema changes related to a specific feature that you're developing locally or something.
Yeah, there's a whole reason you could have variants, or maybe you deploy a variant of a graph for like a particular, like it's like private, right? Like you expose more functionality to paying customers than you do for like your public API or something. There's a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So if you were to go back to Rover and you were to type in, let's try typing in just a wrong graph ID. So like remove the worst dev altogether. Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, I don't know what is going on with my prompt. Okay, I think it has something to do with this Docker crap, honestly.
Interesting.
Okay.
So yeah, just type like something like Rover graph fetch, and then just I don't know, do like a $ symbol or something. Just something that's clearly not a graph ID. So yeah, so it says you get an invalid value for graph ref, which is the argument that's being passed to graph fetch here. But then it tells you what it's expecting for this graph ref. And it says, these graph IDs must be in the format name, which is what we've been using. It's just, the worst dev dash stuff, or name at variant. And it tells you the constraints on those keys to make sure you don't like pass anything too wild and crazy. But yeah, if you did have a different variant like prod or dev that you wanted to work with, you instead would just pass the worst dev at symbol and then the name of the variant afterwards. Yeah.
Nice. And actually we could see this. So like, cause I have it specified, sure it is pointing at current, but this is literally what it looks like, right? So this could be at dev, at staging, or if you have like a PR based deployment and workflow, it could be like at whatever the branch name is, right? Like this could be a variable, right? I could change this to whatever I want that to be.
Totally. Yeah. And this is just, in the Apollo CLI, that was either a flag or something defined in a config.js file. But especially with the config file, like variants are often something that you're jumping in between. Like if you're working on developing a graph, you might be jumping between variants, and rather than defining a separate flag every time, like we just have it declared as part of the graph identifier itself, because it is like your production variant of your graph is a for all intents and purposes a separate graph, at least theoretically.
Absolutely, it absolutely is.
Yeah, but yeah, I think on that note, that kind of I think we've touched on most of the like foot guns you might come across in using Rover. Hopefully, if if we've missed something, please open up an issue, or just scream at me on Twitter. That's also allowed.
Absolutely. And if y'all want to see like how I've got CI/CD working and how I'm using Rover, check it out. You can go to this repo. It's open. There's nothing private in here, so you can go through and check this out. I've actually started to document the architecture and how this stuff is working together.
Nice.
So you can kind of get a feel for how this is working. I saw fly.io, so you can get a feel. Yeah, exactly, for how this is actually behaving. And it's really neat. It's I spent about a week implementing this, and the one of the easiest parts of it was setting up the CI/CD, right? Like once I had my graphs and I was like, all right, I'm ready to federate them, it was like a couple lines files. So the way that I'm doing it, so let's look at deploy the website service, because this is interesting. And so actually, I'm gonna spare you all. I'm not gonna go through this again. I literally just went through this. Oh, this is gonna be so meta because I have to go to Twitch. If y'all look right below, like in the bottom in the videos, there's going to be highlights. I did the deep dive of how I set this up, and in that I cover how I'm using Rover, how I have CI/CD all the way configured, and it walks you through that all together. But let me just go here and go to, I think if I go to video producer, I can get to the link really quick so y'all can get a bit of behind the scenes. What's up, Scion Theory? Thank you for the follow. Thank you for joining us. We are just kind of wrapping up here in a minute, but here we go. Deep dive into real time with Federation, but this also covers very much in depth how I have CI/CD configured, right? And how I'm doing that. So I'm going to copy that. I'll drop it here. If you get a chance, check it out. I'm also working on a blog post right now for the Apollo blog on CI/CD for your data graph. So again, we're going to be following this up with more written content. You can also go look at the Rover docs. So, you know, multiple avenues to get your Rover news.
Yeah. And this is something we don't have all of the CI workflows necessarily documented super well yet. That's something, you know, we will have that in the future, but it was lower down on the priority list for public preview.
For sure.
If you are just joining us now later in this demonstration, this is I want to reiterate that Rover is very much in public preview. We might break this if you end up using this for production workflows. Like, we might end up changing the API to something that could be breaking for you. So, you know, use at your own risk, but please absolutely try it out and use it and let us know if you have anything to say about it. We'd love to get your feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think, you know, that's it from my side. I don't really have much else. I think we covered everything really well. So hang on, let me transition us back over to just me and you, our big, beautiful faces. Woo! Yeah. And so thanks everybody for joining us. We hope this was informative. If you have questions, both my handle is down here and Jake's handle's down there somewhere, right over there. And you know, you can reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you, especially if you try out Rover. If you don't, then you better not be messaging me. No, I'm just kidding. No, but seriously, try it out. Y'all let us know what you think. If you're using Studio, or actually if you're interested in using Studio, definitely follow me, because I'm working on a ton of this content coming up. And, you know, we're going to take a look at Federation for use cases outside of enterprise, like what I'm doing with it. Right. And so when we think of graphs and we think of composition, we often think of scale. It's generally the first thing that people associate with it, right? But there's a whole story around domain-driven design, separation of concerns, and a lot of other reasons why you might want to compose a graph outside of we have a bunch of teams and a bunch of people all trying to contribute to it. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be very eye-opening. You know, we want to bring Federation, make it common to the everyday developer and not just folks, you know, at large companies. So heck yeah. Well, with that, Jake, if you've got nothing else, I guess we can get out of here. What do you think? Should we get out of here?
I'm good.
All right. Yeah. Normally we would raid another channel, but unfortunately I am, now that we're at 4:30 here, a little after. I do got to jump because I got something else that I got to go get into. So we're not going to raid today. I'm sorry, all of my Twitch friends. We'll raid you next time. Thank you everyone for joining us. Jake, let's go ahead and get out of here. Later, y'all.
Yeah.